All right, welcome to 4.1. We're going to focus on guideline number 4, isolating the variable. So we have this first example here, x over 6 equals negative 13. So what I'm going to do, all right, so every time we are going to draw this equal sign balance bar. It's called that because only the equal sign goes on this balance bar, nothing else. Okay, here we go. So let's go through our guidelines to see where we go. First, do we have any parentheses in our problem? No, we don't. Do we have any like terms? So we have x over 6 on this side equals negative 13. Because again, we're focusing if it's got stuff on the same side. But no, we don't. Step number 3, is the variable on one side? Yes, it is. So we're good. We can move on to the next step. All right, next is isolating the variable, which is the focus of today's goals. First, we have to figure out who's the constant and who's the coefficient. So we have x over 6. A coefficient is attached to the variable. So this 6 is a coefficient. A constant is a number that's with but not attached to the variable. So focusing on the side with the variable, there is no constant. Now, this negative 13 is a constant, but it's already away from the variable, so we don't have to worry about that. We're trying to get this variable alone, hence the word isolate the variable, okay? So we're trying to find the variable's numbers. Let's do this. We have x over 6. Now, a fraction bar means division. When we want to move this 6 to the other side, we have to do the opposite to go on the other side of that equal bar. So the opposite of dividing 6 is going to be multiplying 6. And then if I do multiplying by 6 on one side, you got to do it on the other. So if I multiply 6 here, I got to also multiply 6 here. Now, what happens is this 6 that we're multiplying and this 6 we're dividing cancel out, and all we're left with is just the x. So we can drop that x down because that's what's left. Then I have my equal sign gets dropped down on the equal sign bar, and I have to figure out what negative 13 times 6 is. In my calculator, I'm going to do negative 13 times 6, and I get negative 78. So my x is negative 78. My x is all by itself. This is your answer. Okay, now this is my answer. Now the last step in our guideline is to check your work every time. So we're gonna plug in the variable's number into the original equation, and it has to be the same number when you math it. So let's look at this. Check, because I want to check my work. My original equation was x over 6 equals negative 13. Figured out this x was a negative 78, so I'm going to replace this x with a negative 78 over 6, nothing else changes, equals negative 13. So I have to figure out what this is in my calculator. So remember, a fraction bar means division, so I got negative 78 divided by 6. And look at that, I get negative 13 equals, everything else drops down, negative 13. That works out. So our answer is good. In our next example, we have negative 23 equals b minus 6. So again, I always want to start with that balance bar so we don't forget anything. And then I'm going to go through my checklist real quick. Do I have any parentheses? No, I don't. Do I have to combine like terms? No like terms on this side or on this side, so we're good. Is the variable on one side? Yes, it is. The variable is only on the right, so that's good. Now it's time to isolate the variable. So now we need to identify the constant and the coefficient. The constant is the number with but not attached to the variable. So right now I have a constant of negative 6. And then a coefficient is the number attached to the variable. I don't have a number attached in front of this variable b, so we don't have a coefficient this time. Okay, so with a constant, you can add or subtract to move the constant. Now, we got to remember, you got to do the opposite to move something to the other side, and what you do on one side, you have to do on the other side. I, right now, have a negative 6. I got to be careful. I got to look at that sign that's in front. So that means that I am going to add that 6 to cancel it. So negative 6 and positive 6 cancel, but if I do plus 6 on one side, I have to do plus 6 on the other side. And then I'm gonna write this bar here because it's like an adding bar. Remember from like second grade, you would have 14 plus 2 and then this equal sign bar. These guys right here are the same thing. Negative 23 plus 6. I might not know that off the top of my head, so they gave us calculators, so I can do negative 23 plus 6, and I get a negative 17. My equal sign gets dropped down on the equal sign bar. Then I have to bring down my b, and then that's it. So my b is isolated. We have isolated the variable. We got it by itself. So this negative 17 is our answer. Now, we got to check. So when we check, once again, we take our original problem, negative 23 equals b minus 6. We're going to take this negative 17 we found for b and replace the b. So I'm going to replace this b with a negative 17, but nothing else changes. So this negative 23 stays the same, equals negative 6. The only thing that ever changes in a problem is a variable. Numbers stay that number forever. All right, so I'm gonna check this into my calculator. So I have negative 17 minus 6. This gives me negative 23 equals, comes down, negative 23. These two numbers are the same, so that means we have a good answer. In my next example, we have 6x equals 0. So the first thing I want to do is write my equal sign bar. And then there are no parentheses. There's no like terms. The variable is on one side, right? The x is on the left side. So we have to isolate the variable, which means we have to identify the constant and coefficient. So let's do that. The coefficient is the number attached to the variable, so we have a coefficient, but we don't have a number with the variable and not attached, so there's no constant with this variable. We do have a constant on this side, but it's away from the variable. It's on the other side, so we don't have to really worry about it. 6x. So with coefficients, our options are to multiply or divide to move a coefficient. Okay, so we have a coefficient. So the options are to either multiply or divide to move the coefficient. All right, and again, what you do on one side, you do on the other. And if you're gonna move that 6, we have to do the opposite to move it to the other side. 6x is multiplication, right? It's a secret multiplication. So we have 6 times x. So to get rid of that, we are going to use a fraction bar to show dividing by 6. So we divide by 6, and what you do on one side, you do on the other. Multiplying by 6 and dividing by 6 cancel out, so I'm going to cross out those 6's, and we're left with just an x. The equal sign gets dropped down, and then we have 0 divided by 6. So what I'm going to do in my calculator is do 0 divided by 6, and I get 0 as my answer. My variable is isolated, so I'm saying that this is my answer. So the next thing I'm going to do is check my work. So my original problem was 6x equals 0. I am saying that x is equal to 0, so I'm going to replace this x with the number 0. So I have 6, and remember, these are being multiplied, so I have to do 6 times 0 equals 0. I'm going to do the math with this. 6 times 0 is 0, equals, comes down, 0. All right, these are the same, so that means we have a good answer. All right, this time we have 5 plus a over 8 equals 6. You always want to write your equal sign bar first, then you check. Do we have any parentheses? We do not. Do we have any combining like terms here? We do not. These are not like terms, so we're good. Is the variable on one side? Yes, it is. It's only on the right side. It's the letter A. So now it's time to isolate the variable. So first we want to identify the constant and the coefficient. Constant is the number with but not attached to the variable. This 5 is with but not attached to the variable, so this is my constant. The coefficient is the number attached to the variable. This 8 is my coefficient because it is attached to the variable. So what I'm going to do first is, you always want to get rid of your constant first. So that means we can add or subtract. So right now, this is a positive 5. If I want to move it to the other side, I need to subtract 5. We got to do the opposite. And what you do on one side, you do on the other. So 5 minus 5, these cancel. We drop down everything else. So a over 8 gets dropped down. The equal sign gets dropped down. 6 minus 5 is 1. Next thing we're going to do, so I got to get rid of the coefficient. Coefficients, you can either multiply or divide to move them, all right? But if you want to move it to the other side, you have to do the opposite. So this fraction bar means dividing 8. So what we're going to do is multiply 8. And those cancel out. But if you multiply by 8 on one side, you've got to multiply by 8 on the other side. This leaves us with an a, so drop the a, equals 1 times 8 is 8. So we're saying that a equals 8. We are going to check our answer. So using the original problem, 5 plus a over 8 equals 6, we said that a is equal to 8. So I'm going to replace this a with the number 8. Nothing else about this problem changed. So I still have the 5 plus over 8, right? This a is now an 8, but I have this fraction bar 8 with it equals 6. Now, you can use your, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally's, or you can take this problem and plug it into your calculator. So I'm going to take this problem, plug it in my calculator. So I have 5 plus, to make a fraction bar, alpha y equals enter, 8 over 8. And look at that, I get a 6. 6 is what this all becomes. The equal sign gets dropped down, equals 6. These are the same, so we have a good answer. Last example, we have negative 8x plus 2 equals 122. So first things, always have your equal sign bar first. Then we check, do we have any parentheses? No, we don't. Is there any combining like terms? These aren't like terms, these aren't like terms, so we don't have that. Is the variable on one side? Well, we only have an x on the left side, so that's good. Now we have to isolate the variable. So first we're going to check for a constant and a coefficient with the variable. Negative 8 is my coefficient because it is attached to the variable. 2 is my constant because it's the number with the variable but not attached. All right, so first we can move the constant, and our options are to add or subtract. I see we have a plus 2, so we are going to do the opposite. I'm going to minus 2, and if I do it on one side, I do it on the other side. This leaves us with 2 minus 2 cancels. We drop down that negative 8x. We drop down the equal sign on the equal sign bar. And then 122 minus 2 is 120. Now we have to get rid of our coefficient. So we have negative 8 times x because this is secret multiplication. And for coefficients, we can either multiply or divide, but if we want to get rid of it, we have to do the opposite to move it to the other side of the equal sign bar. So a negative 8 times x means we're going to divide by negative 8. So see how the sign goes with it. If it's a coefficient, whatever you have in front, you multiply or divide the entire thing. All right, so I'm going to take 120 and divide that by negative 8. The negative 8's cancel. We drop down the x because that's all that's left. We have an equal sign. We drop that down onto the equal sign bar. And then I don't know this off the top of my head, so I'm going to use a calculator. I'm going to take 120 divided by negative 8. And that gives me negative 15. X equals negative 15. So once again, we want to check to make sure this is good. So I have negative 8x plus 2 equals 122. That's the original problem. We are saying that x equals negative 15. So I'm going to replace this x with a negative 15, but it's being multiplied, so I got to be careful. Everything else though comes down. So I got that -8 plus 2 equals 122. I'm gonna type this bad boy into my calculator exactly how I see it. So I have -8 times -15 plus 2. So this looks exactly like this. I get 122 for my answer, so that's good because it should be equaling 122 because we want them to be the same. So this means we have a good answer. Our answer was good.